The time of our children's school year is nearing its end, and I have to sort of work harder now to keep my kids motivated to finish well with their school and persist in their study habits. I'm afraid that the summer vacation fever may prematurely infect them so that they lack the will or the resolve to study and may not finish well. So how do I keep my kids motivated so that they can finish well and endure till the very end? The way I do this is I try to instill in them wisdom by giving them a proper perspective of what is the end goal. I tell my kids, if the Lord gives us 70 years to live, then that means the first 20 years or so that God has given us will determine how we live the next 50 years. Would you rather be lazy now for the first 20 years and work hard for the next 50? Or work hard now for the first 20 and by the grace of God have an easier life for the next 50? This first 20 years or so that God has given us for education, I tell my kids, will determine the quality of life that we will live for the next 50. So I tell them, establish your work habits now as a foundation for the rest of your lives. The work that we put in every day builds on a stronger foundation for the future. So this perspective of the big picture usually sets my kids straight and refuels their motivation to study. In writing a letter to the persecuted churches in Roman Asia Minor, John likewise encountered a church lacking motivation to persevere precisely because of increasing persecution. Caesar appeared to be Lord and not Jesus. The Roman Empire appeared stronger and more powerful than Jesus. The unbelievers who compromised their witness appeared to prosper and get away with sin. The believers who refused to compromise their witness for Christ suffered and died. So the church needed wisdom, a proper perspective of the believers' suffering in light of the end goal, the end of history, in order to combat the dispiritedness and the apathy which appeared to ail the churches. So yes, the church is suffering. Their suffering will continue, and in fact, it will intensify. But evil cannot triumph because Christ has already triumphed by His death and His resurrection. If the church only endures for a little while, then they can enjoy the glory of heaven for eternity. Thus, John calls for the need of wisdom. And such a wisdom is a proper perspective on suffering, so that indeed the churches may endure till the very end. Specifically, the call for wisdom involves three ideas. So here are the 3 points that will form the structure of this morning's sermon. Number 1, wisdom propels perseverance. Wisdom propels perseverance. Number 2, wisdom prevails over fear. And number 3, wisdom posits Christ as sovereign over all things. So let us consider the first point, namely that wisdom propels perseverance, which is clear in verse 9 of Revelation chapter 17. Follow along silently with me. Here is the mind. In some translation, here is the call to understand. But in the original language, literally, it's just mind. So it's figuratively telling us, have understanding. Here is the mind who has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains where the woman sits upon them. Here, in Revelation chapter 17, John addresses a church lacking the resolve, as I mentioned, to persevere because of severe persecution, which in the 6th verse of the same chapter indicates, in verse 6, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. So this is this woman who seduces the unbelievers with the drunkenness of financial idolatry, and who eggs and who provokes the unbelievers to persecute Christians. So she's drunk with the blood of the saints, which means to say that believers are dying left and right, and she drinks their blood because it satisfies her. With the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, when I saw her, I wondered greatly, John says. So John here calls for the mind of wisdom in light of persecution. that the church needs to strengthen their resolve to persevere. And the Old Testament confirms wisdom as the fuel to perseverance in its use of the same phrase in Daniel 12 and in Daniel 11. We'll just look at Daniel 12 this morning. It's the same context. So many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined. Daniel here is talking about the end of the days. So the righteous, the faithful, they'll purify themselves through suffering. And by their suffering, they will wear white robes because they endure till the end. But the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall have the mind or the understanding. The same or similar word. But those who are wise shall have the mind. Notice very clearly the contrast. Those who persevere, who will be clothed with white, because they endure till the end, they have the mind. They understand that suffering is only temporary, but the coming of the Son of Man will be eternal, and the Son of Man will reign forever. But those who do not have the mind, whose perspective is narrow, whose orientation is for the present, who only looks at the suffering and not at the weight of glory being formed because of the suffering, they will not persevere and they will act wickedly. So here in Daniel chapter 12, Daniel anticipates the coming of the king who will exalt himself over God and will persecute the people of God. And the persecution will be so severe that Daniel had to ask the question in Daniel chapter 12 verse 6, how long will this continue? How long will the people of God suffer? The answer, of course, is a famous refrain that we have seen in the book of Revelation, which has its root in the book of Daniel. The answer is 3.5 years, which I have mentioned previously that it's not to be taken literally, but rather figuratively, because 7 means whole or complete, right? 7 is also symbolic because the Lord made the heavens and the earth in 7 days. We're supposed to rest on the 7th day. The 7 heads, the 7 horns, 777. It means complete, it is whole, everything is done. So the 3.5 is right in the middle, which means to say that the reign of evil will not last for a whole period. It'll be long enough so that at least it's half. It'll be severe, but it won't last forever because 7 is whole. It'll only be halfway through. So it's been 2,000 years since Jesus died and resurrected. And we are now in the period of the 3.5 years. The people of God waiting. So the 3.5 years, at least from our perspective, includes 2,000 years. Our suffering, which begun with the early church, the Roman Asia Minor, the churches who were fed to the lions because they didn't confess Caesar as Lord, but they insisted that Jesus is Lord. Their suffering has begun. And the 3.5 years has already started. But let us not forget the other background for the 3.5 years. It's also the 3.5 days that Jesus stood inside or was laid inside the grave. It's for 3 days. But in the 3rd day, he rose victoriously. So Daniel then foresaw the time when the persecution against God's people will intensify and it will last for a while. At least 2,000 years as far as we know. But the time of evil will stop. And the Son of Man will come. But those who persevere are those who have wisdom. They will realize that the suffering is temporary, it is not eternal. But the joy of heaven will be eternal, so it is worth persevering in the present. So the point is apparent. If you have wisdom, you will persevere. Jesus himself exhorts his hearers to endure precisely because of the coming persecution against his followers. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 13, Jesus says, "The one who endures to the end shall be saved." Endurance is the prerequisite to salvation. It's not because you said the sinner's prayer when you're 5 years old that saves you. It is the proof of your salvation, namely endurance till the very end. As Jesus says, those who endure till the very end shall be saved. Not those who are Christians when times are good. Not Christians who are only Christians on Sundays. But all throughout the work week, they behave like the devil. But at church, they behave like angels. Those who endure till the end shall be saved. And Jesus warns us that the persecution will be so severe that Jesus has to, listen to this, cut the days short. Because if he's to extend it any longer, no one will endure. Jesus says, not even the elect can endure. So he has to intervene. He has to cut the suffering short. Because if it goes on any longer, the suffering will be so severe that not even God's people can endure. That's what he says in verse 22. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being will be saved. Or if you read the Voice of the Martyr magazine, where pastors are hacked while preaching as their children witness in horror the attack against their dad. How much worse can it get? Jesus says it will be worse. And he has to cut the day short, because if it continues unabated, that no one can be saved. No one will persevere. Not even the elect, Jesus says. So he has to cut it short. Christ, of course, will not and cannot allow the elect to fall. So even if it means cutting the day short, he will do it. The implication of Jesus' words is nothing less than astounding. No matter what, Christ will not allow us, his people, to fall because of suffering. He will not do it. Even if it means he will prematurely come to end the world so that we will not fall, he will do it. So that the elect, the people of God, will not fall. But we need to have wisdom to know that suffering will continue and will thrive unrelentingly until the return of Jesus. Having this mind of the end of history with Christ and the saints triumphing over evil is wisdom, and such a wisdom thereby propels endurance. And this is the first point. If we have this wisdom that the end of history has Jesus winning for all eternity, then we would endure in the present. The second point is that wisdom prevails over fear precisely because of the coming intensification of suffering. In verse 9, here's the mind who has the wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains where the woman sits upon them. John here specifically interprets for us the content of the wisdom in verse 9. That is to say, the wisdom is this: the 7 heads from the beast, remember 7 means whole or complete, are the 7 mountains where the woman sits upon them. Again, the 7 mountains refer not to the literal mountains, but rather to the figurative kingdoms of the earth. Since elsewhere in the book of Revelation, the use of the word mountain occurs figuratively and not literally. For instance, in chapter 8, verse 8 of Revelation, the second angel blew his trumpet, something like a great mountain burning with fire. This is not a literal mountain. This is talking about the mountain of Sinai where the law was given. So it's the place where the law was given, which typifies the coming judgment of God. The Old Testament affirms the use of mountains to refer to kingdoms. For instance, in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord, the mountain of the house of the Lord is referring to Jerusalem or Zion or Judah. So the mountain is symbolic for a kingdom. Judah shall be established as the highest of the mountains, meaning Judah shall be the superpower at the end of the age and shall be lifted up above the hills. So the seven mountains then refers to the total sum of all earthly kingdoms from the beginning of time until the very end of time. The interpretation therefore becomes apparent for us. The seven heads of the seven beasts signify demonic authority that are behind the earthly nations in power. In other words, Christ allows Satan or the beast to control all earthly superpowers for all time. So behind the persecution of Christians from a communist government, from a capitalist government, maybe in the future, behind that, and I'm sure we begin to feel the persecution against us as Christians within our workplaces when we stand for Christ, when it comes to sexual ethics, when it comes to, for instance, abortion, or when it comes to homosexuality, or when we insist that Jesus alone is Lord, that He's the only way to God and no one else, then we feel the backlash that's against us. That backlash is coming from the beast, the seven heads. And the seven heads are the seven mountains, the earthly kingdoms at power, which is the dominant view that if you stand for Christ, automatically you are disenfranchised and you are ridiculed and you are isolated and socially ostracized. He's that Jesus freak. He's the intolerant one. He's not cool. Let's not be friends with him. At least in America. But I'm sure if you are familiar with world news, the number one group that is most persecuted, the one group that is the victim of human rights are Christians. Every day Christians die, slaughtered. In Egypt, the Coptic churches, just recently, Muslim militants attacked a church service, just hacked them to death. Christians gathering. Now, we may not see the need to persevere because there's AC in our place. And when we stand for Christ, they just stop being our Facebook friend. They unfriend us. But in Egypt, they slaughter you to death. Why be a Christian? The one who has wisdom, they will persevere. And they will not fear. Behind that attack is the beast. It's demonic. From Satan. Though evil has always persisted and persecuted God's people in and through human governments, from the beginning, if you remember, Egypt persecuted Israel through Pharaoh. It's always been that way. The superpowers always persecute God's people. Remember Joseph? If you remember, Daniel persecuted, brought before the lions. It's always been this way. Yet John tells us that the coming evil through the human government in the end will rival no previous earthly nation in power and in persecution. It's going to get worse before it gets not better but best, because Jesus is coming. In verse 10, and there the seven kings, 5 of whom fell, and one who is still living, and the other who is yet to come, and when he comes, he must remain for a little while. The book of Revelation here expressly informs us that there is still yet another beast, far superior in power and in persecution than the previous other beast. How do we know this? Because this beast is given the threefold formula that's been applied to God and to Christ. His power will appear to parallel Jesus himself, because the threefold formula is also applied to Jesus. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 8, they never rest day or night, saying, Holy, holy is the Lord God, the all-powerful, who was, number one, and who is, number two, and who is still to come. Threefold formula. If you remember what this means that Jesus is sovereign over history. He's the God of the past, who was. He's the God of the future, who is to come. And He's the God of the present, who is. So from the beginning of time to the end of time, Jesus is King, and He controls everything in between. Totality of polarity. The beginning until the end, Jesus reigns and He rules, despite of outward appearances of evil appearing to thrive. Jesus is sovereign over evil still. But the point is, the coming of the beast will mimic Jesus in power because He has the same qualities of Jesus. The one who fell, who was, He died as well, and who is still living. And the other who is yet to come, the one who is still living here, probably referring to Rome, the superpower at that time. And who is yet to come. There will be a greater one. And the beast's cheap imitation of Christ becomes even more obvious with its attempt to resurrect just like Jesus. In chapter 13, verse 3, I saw one of his heads, the heads of the beast. The head refers to the earthly kingdom of the beast, as if it had been slain, as if it died. So notice the figurative use. It's not literally dead, but it's as if it is dead, and his fatal wound was healed. So he died and he resurrected. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. This word amazed is another word for worship. So they worshiped the beast because the beast appeared strong, like Jesus. He died and he resurrected as well. John then, through this symbolic vision, is simply telling us not to give in to this fear because of this coming superpower under demonic influence. To be sure, this last kingdom will be fierce in its opposition and its persecution of the church. Yet do not be afraid. John tells us, have wisdom. Have wisdom. Greg Beale writes this in his commentary, quote, John's primary intent in chapter 17, verse 10, is to inform his readers how far they have stand from the conclusion of the full sequence of the 7 oppressive rulers. He tells them that one more short reign will elapse until the end of the oppressive dominance of Rome, which represent all ungodly oppressive powers. John is telling us we're almost there. We are near the end. We're just waiting for that one last head, one last mountain, one last superpower. And we will see it. And once it appears, watch out. Persecution will intensify, but it will be short-lived. Do not fear. Endure. Endure till the end. Not only does wisdom propel perseverance and prevail over fear, wisdom also posits Christ as King in all things, which is the final point of the sermon. Wisdom posits Christ as King over the duration of evil's existence, over the existence of evil itself. He will cut evil short. And there are the 7 kings, 5 of whom fell, one who is still living, the other is yet to come. And when he comes, he must remain for a little while. Not for a long time, but for a little while. And the beast itself, who was and who is not, is the eighth and is not of the seven, and it departs for its destruction. So unlike Jesus, this beast will resurrect to be destroyed, whereas Jesus resurrected to reign. The contrast is clear. One is a cheap imitation, one is the real thing. Verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings who have not received the kingdom. Remember, the horn represents power, right? Like the horn of a ram. The bigger the horn, the powerful it is. So that's the meaning, the 10 horns of the 10 kings, the powerful kings. I've read some commentaries that tried to list all the Roman emperors to try to figure out who the last king will be. I think that's not a wise endeavor, because it's not to be taken literally, but rather figuratively. So the 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings who have not received the kingdom, but they with the beast receive authority like kings for 1 hour. That is to say, all the earthly superpowers will gather together, and they will give their power to one. And such a power only lasts for 1 hour. Not literally, but he's saying it's going to be short. It's not going to be 3.5 years, like 2,000 years or so, but it'll be shorter than that. But it'll be intense. The whole world will be against Christians. There will be no advocates for Christians at all. Because everyone, the 10 kings, they will gang up. All the earthly powers, they will join forces, and they will give their power to the beast, and they will join him in persecuting the church. The short-lived tenure of the final beast's reign is an allusion to Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel himself likewise envisioned the short but powerful reign of the final kingdom. Here's the background to the idea of a short-lived final kingdom. In verse 25 of Daniel 7, he shall speak words. This is talking about the Antichrist, the one who will oppose the Son of Man. He will speak words against the Most High, against the Lord, which means he will have false teachings. And he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, which means he will persecute Christians. And he shall think to change the times and the law. That is to say, he'll be so powerful that he can change laws in order to persecute Christians, and do so without any legal ramifications. And they shall be given into his hand. He will do this without any opposition at all. For how long? For 3.5. For a time, times and half a time. 3.5 years. But the court, but there's very strong, but the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion, whose dominion? The beast, shall be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. He will be powerful. He shall speak words against Jesus. He shall wear us out, but the court will sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away. So the kind of wisdom that propels perseverance and prevails over fear is the kind of wisdom that understands Christ is sovereign, that he will end the very existence of evil itself. It'll be a little while. Be 1 hour. Finally, wisdom posits Christ as king because Christ already triumphed over Satan in his death and his resurrection, so that Satan's final attack with all the earthly nations against the saints in the future will prove futile and worthless. In verse 14 of Revelation chapter 17, follow along silently, they will wage war against the Lamb. So notice, what is the purpose that the 10 horns with the 10 kings will join forces to give their power to the beast? The 7th mountain and the 7th head, the final beast. They will join forces and give it to the one person. What is the purpose? In verse 14, so that they can wage war against Jesus. Because they're going to need all the help that they can get. But the Lamb will simply conquer them. If you remember what this word is, Nikao, which the word for Nike, victory. He will have victory over them. Why? Because he's the Lord of Lords. Daniel 7, I saw the man, and all dominion and glory and authority shall be given to the Son of Man. All dominions shall serve and obey the Son of Man. Jesus is the Son of Man. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. So they will wage war against Jesus. They will wage war against the saints. But we will triumph. Why? Because Jesus already did. He died and he resurrected. As John states in Revelation chapter 1, verse 18, and the living one, I was dead, he was crucified, and behold, I am alive forevermore. He resurrected. And the implication is, therefore I have the keys. Keys means authority. I have authority over death and Hades. He reigns. He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This specific phrase, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, is an allusion to Daniel chapter 4, verse 37. The exact same phrase occurs. The context there, if you're curious, is Daniel had to interpret the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream? He couldn't have any peace because he had a dream of a statue, and the statue kept on eating one another until the final statue existed. And so he asked all the wise people to tell him what the dream is so that they can interpret the dream, and no one could tell him what the dream is because no one knows what you're dreaming about. Only God does. So King Nebuchadnezzar was so upset that no one could tell him what his dream was so that they could interpret what the dream was, that he threatened to kill all those wise people, all the scholars. And one of the scholars said, wait, I know some guy named Daniel. He might tell you what your dream is, and he can interpret for you. So he calls Daniel to save the lives of the scholars. And Daniel says, I don't know what your dream is, but the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, he knows. And if he wants to tell me, he'll tell me. And so the Lord told Daniel. And that's the background there. Jesus is Yahweh. He is King of Kings and he is Lord of Lords. As we conclude, I would like to leave you with the following challenge this morning. And it's simply this, it's twofold. We must not yield to apathy. You guys know what apathy means? Like laziness, dispiritedness. I don't feel like it. And must not weaken our resolve against sin. That's because evil thrives in the present and will intensify in the future. We cannot do that. We need wisdom because wisdom propels perseverance, and wisdom prevails over fear because such a wisdom posits Christ as king over evil by his death and by his resurrection. Those who have wisdom, they will wear white garments, but those who do not have wisdom, they will act wickedly. I know I told you last Sunday, or I indicated at least last Sunday in my sermon, that I will get back to the gym, but the truth is I didn't. I've yielded to apathy and laziness this whole week. My resolve to work out is very weak at this point. When it's about time to go to the gym, my perspective is far too limited to my present circumstance. I'm tired. There's going to be traffic, I think. I'm going to work out later tonight. I'll just do 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups and 100 jumping jacks. Just for myself, but of course I never do. I can skip today. I tell myself, today's not a good day. I'm too busy today. Everything is today, 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 today. All present thinking. I have no wisdom to consider the future. That if I build on my perseverance in the gym, that will have a long-term beneficial effect to my health in the future. That what we do in the present determines the outcome of our future. Sometimes we're just so caught up with it today. I don't feel like it. I have no resolve. I don't feel well today. I'm just going to skip. Perhaps my attitude for the gym reflects some people's attitude towards Christ and the gospel. I'm too busy to pray. Sin is too powerful. Sin is too good. I can skip reading the Bible today. I'm too tired to go to church. Stayed up late. God knows what you're doing. Playing video games. Going out. I don't know. Just today. All present orientation. Our resolve is weak. We yield to apathy. We need wisdom. Evil is short-lived. Christ has triumphed because he died and he resurrected. Let us remember, no matter how bad it gets, neither death, nor angels, nor powers, nor swords, nor famine, nor distress can ever separate us from the love of Christ. And no one can pluck us out from the hands of Christ. Jesus says, I have to cut the day short just so that my elect will persevere. No matter how bad it gets, Christ will not allow us to fail. Our prayers every day and our reading of the Bible every day builds a foundation for a better future with Christ in heaven for all eternity. Let's not be present-oriented. Let us be future-driven. And that's called wisdom. Having understanding on how to live your life. Don't look at this light and momentary affliction, but look at the eternal weight of glory being formed in us. The problem is we need the eyes of faith because we don't see it. When we read the Bible, we get stronger in our relationship with the Lord. It's not like you work out in the mirror for a month and then you see your biceps growing, you're getting to see some curves here or some lines. It's not like that. You don't see it right away. But you get stronger and stronger and stronger. Don't skip prayer. Don't skip reading the Bible. You need wisdom. Don't look at your present circumstance. Look at the eternal weight of glory that awaits us. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Mothers risk pain, disappointment, suffering with every pregnancy. Yet mothers continue to do it. Why? Because the reward of a child is worth the risk of pain, disappointment, and suffering. And that future anticipation of a child, this future orientation of a promise, the Bible calls it hope. And hope for what we do not see is still not there. It's coming. Significantly then, Isaiah calls upon the example of motherhood to vividly embody Judah's profound hope in suffering and in pain, yet with hope. Motherhood for Isaiah embodies pain and suffering,